Being data-driven and gathering insights, not only on the micro level, but at the macro level, should really be what informs good design.
Love is in the air, and I'm excited to welcome everybody to the newest episode of Barriers to Entry, the podcast where we explore the intersection of Web3, the metaverse, digital universes, the blockchain, and a whole bunch of other buzzwords with the architecture and design industry. I'm Bobby Bonet. I'm here with my two favorite co-hosts, Andrew Lane and Tess Bain. And if I may, you two, let me be the first to wish you a happy Valentine's Day.
Wow.
That's really sweet.
That was one of our most romantic intros as well. I also feel badly for anyone else who co-hosts anything with you that's not us, because they've definitely been put in their rank.
Playing favorites.
Yeah.
I was asked by my oldest daughter a couple weeks ago, moms and dads aren't supposed to pick favorite kids, right? And I said, yes. And she said, well, if you were pretending who your favorite kid is, who would that favorite kid be? But I did not give her an answer, but I'm happy to call both of you my co-favorites.
I think I'd want you to pick, not to put you on the spot, but...
Gosh. Well, let's revisit this in the outro. Today,
Right.
Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest and what you're looking forward to?
Delighted, because I was very excited when I learned that Sebastian Brauer was going to be joining us. Sebastian made some news in our little corner of the industry a little while back when he was named the Chief Metaverse Officer at Crate and Barrel. So obviously a major and prominent force in the industry, naming a really important title on top of his role in product. So I think that's also really telling. And I think that it's really going to come through in the conversation that we'll have, is that he's someone who comes from a background of design and product, but he's been compelled by technology and sort of learned and earned his way into, I think, a really unique role. So really excited to have him.
Learned and earned is the next t-shirt that we need to produce, but it's also on the money. You'll hear Sebastian, I don't know how he fits the amount of research and reading he does into his day, but he's a wealth of resources, and I'm going to be excited that we're able to share those with you.
And kudos to Crate and Barrel, too, just for being insightful enough to recognize the importance of having someone like him investigating this space and the way that he is so thoughtful about his approach. And as an organization, I mean, you spoke about the amount of research and time he spends, but that's, I think, going to be one of the most exciting things to see is what they finally move forward with when they do launch.
I think that's a really good intro. Let's get to Sebastian and see what all he has to share with us.
Here today on Barriers to Entry, we're psyched to have one of our industry's premier Web3 thought leaders. He holds the illustrious title of Head of Metaverse and Web3 at Crate and Barrel, and is also the company's Senior Vice President in charge of product design and development. Welcome to the pod, Sebastian Brauer.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm delighted to be here.
We're delighted to have you. We did want to start off today just by asking you to tell us a little bit about your first iPod.
Oh, you're asking me to travel way back in time, but lots of good memories associated to that. I always loved music. I remember going to the mall and buying CDs back in the day, right? And playing them in my little boombox, which was awesome. So when the first iPod came out, I was just mesmerized. And I remember it being the first version, actually. I was very, very lucky that my uncle actually got his hands on it. I grew up in Ecuador, and it wasn't the easiest thing to get your hands on technology. So I'm sure he bought it in the States during a trip or something. And it was white, and it had the sort of more analog kind of wheel that would make that sound. And it could only hold, I think, 150 songs, the first version, if I'm not mistaken. But it kind of like changed my life and my view of technology. I completely skipped the whole mini disc situation, and I went straight from CDs to the iPod. And it was such a fascinating jump to me. And that's where my head really started to sort of respect, admire, and just be very interested in technology.
So just personal curiosity, you never made mixtapes then? You skipped that part of the generation?
Maybe a little bit. It was when you had that good song in the radio that you would have to wait.
Yes.
And kind of just be sitting by it to catch it. I would do a little bit of that. Yeah.
I was a big mixtape guy back in the day, but I always remember the first iPod for the advertising too, because it was such a moment where they not only made something that made so much sense as technology, but also they made it so accessible to the consumer by the way that they made it instantly cool.
You're right. The advertising campaigns, as anything that Apple does, were absolutely brilliant. I remember also like the black outlines of people kind of like holding it and dancing to the music. They were super aspirational and just ultra cool.
I just love that little like click, 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 click when you like do the analog scroll.
Yeah, I remember
That was
that.
the best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now we have iPhones that don't even have a wheel, right? A button. It's all touchscreen.
Well, I'm wondering, Sebastian, when you talk about your first iPod, you're recalling the mesmerization that you had not only about the product and the technology in of itself, but that design angle. And Apple obviously notorious for its design. Did you find that from a young age that you had a passion for both technology and design? And then how did that start to dovetail as you started making your way towards school and ultimately manifest itself in the career that you've carved out for yourself over the past couple of decades?
Yeah, I do. And I think what struck me the most was how it solved a huge problem, right? It made music portable, brought music to where you were, made data portable, which is sort of what unlocked the way that we interact with computing today, where we don't have to sit on a desk, we don't have to be on a desktop, it's with us 24/7, and it's absolutely portable. And it was that notion of solving problems and how design is at the center of that that sort of drove me to know at a very early age that I wanted to be a designer. Pair that with the fact that my mother was an architect, my family, one part of my family was always in the arts, and I grew up around art and I grew up around architecture and I grew up being educated about it from my mother. So combining architecture, design, problem solving, technology, the arts, to me, very early on, I knew it was my passion and something that I wanted to pursue. So even in high school, I was very deeply immersed in design, just reading about it, learning about it, going to exhibitions that I was drawn to. And I knew that I wanted to study industrial design very early on. And I just was very clear on that. And it took me on my path that I'm in today.
So, do you think that all these influences have given you a bit of a different approach to product design than you would say is typical in architecture and design industry? Or how do you think about your approach?
I would say so. I would say that my approach is first collaborative. It's data driven. It's driven by customer insights. It's driven by macro data, right? To understand what's happening culturally, what's of relevance, what problems are we facing, what challenges are ahead of us. I've kind of moved away from the form and function type of approach that we've heard for so many years. That's sort of a core principle, and moved into a more tech driven, solution oriented approach that factors in far more than just the beauty of something and considers sustainability, portability, usability, and the human factor at the center. So I would say that my approach is certainly leveraging technology and applying it to everything that we do, but in a way that you also use your human thinking to create value.
I love that. I'm just curious for people out there who are thinking in that way. I think that it's definitely a rising cohort. How is it that you made that a compelling conversation for the organizations that you worked in to take an approach that really looked at technology and data to lead?
Well, through action, right? Through testing and failing, to prototyping, taking risks, being courageous, but mostly by showing that design is a transformational tool. The design can transform, and it's not only about product, but it's also about the way of working, how organizations come together, how you look at the entirety of organization and you look at the work and how the work is being done, grounding it with purpose. So it's been a lot about bringing people together and blurring the line from design just being about product and also being about experiences, interaction, education, the spiritual and psychological. I see design as a practice that really can envelope the entire being, and it can impact so many different practices. Design thinking and creative thinking can be applied to finance, to operations, to engineering. It really is that through line of harnessing the best of the brain and applying it in different mediums.
That's a really good segue. We really want to hear how you got curious about Web3. I mean, maybe it was the process of using that design thinking. What was the route or the initial interest in Web3 for you?
Yeah. I would say that cryptocurrency was a gateway, but not necessarily the financial asset trading piece of it, but the principles of decentralization and what that meant
Hmm.
that really pulled me into Web3 first, right? And just the idea of how we look at data, how we can leverage blockchain technology for authentication and personalization, but also for decentralization and for us to really be true owners of our data with true transparency and what that meant, sort of like understanding the power of blockchain technology and how it can be the first layer to activate sort of a different socioeconomic system, a completely new paradigm, right? So that was my gateway. I started to dabble a little bit in NFTs in the middle of that NFT hype craze when NFTs achieved some crazy valuations. I got lucky with a couple of them. And now we've obviously seen the market kind of change and people start to really question value. But I was really drawn into the collectible aspect of it, and mostly more so than the art value of what I was acquiring. I just wanted to understand what that journey meant, how you could purchase one, how you could trade with it, what culture and community around it was deeming something so valuable. That was my draw. And then, of course, as I started to learn more about it, I started to learn more about the metaverse, which it's important to note that the metaverse and Web 3.0 are completely different concepts. And yes, they have overlap, right? But conflating both is part of why people are confused when you speak about NFTs.
It's kind of how we have a podcast, Sebastian. So thanks for calling that out. That's a headline for us. So,
yeah. So I would say Web3 was my gateway that unlocked the metaverse. And then I started to connect with metaverse thought leaders. I have a lot of people in this community that I've started to connect and reach out to that I'm learning a lot from. One of them is Kathy Hackle. I was definitely drawn into Matthew Ball's thought leadership and devoured his book, The Metaverse and How It Will Change Everything, when it came out. Obviously read Neil Stephenson's novel, Snow Crash. I have tremendous admiration for him and what he's doing now, particularly with his company Lamina One. And then the metaverse from Web3, my thinking started to really go deeper into the metaverse and seeing this as a new dimension for a designer and for an artist to feel that an entirely new world has been unlocked and an entire new medium to create that is not bound by physical constraints is just, to me, a gift that is packed with optimism, that is packed with possibilities, and a gift from pioneers in gaming, media futurists that have written about it in novels and in films. And I would say that my mind is between both worlds and understanding what's happening in both areas. Right now, you're seeing a lot of artificial intelligence coming into center stage, which is another technology that is part of what the metaverse can be. And we're in the very early days of this, right? I was listening to Chris Cox and Neil Stephenson actually at the World Economic Forum talking about the importance of having an open metaverse and building it from the bottoms up, and the importance of it being decentralized and it belonging to citizens, and how we're in the very early days of this. I think Chris Cox called it the Xerox Spark days, which was the early days of the mouse. We're just at the tip of the iceberg. What I do know is that there's a lot of businesses and tech businesses and startups building a lot and creating a lot, and that's what's underwater right now. So what's upon us in the next decade is absolutely fascinating and incredibly encouraging. And as a designer that's always thinking about the future, couldn't be more exciting.
So how are you thinking about your first steps? Like, that was a really big vision that you just laid out. And I'm sure that there's a listener or two who's breathing into a bit of a paper bag right now, digesting all of that. Breaking this down, you're a data-oriented guy. You do things methodically. How do we get started?
Well, first, set some really good values for yourself, values for which you want to go by, that you want to build with. To me, it's all about building and creating with intention and drowning the hype. There's been so much hype around this. To really set a philosophy and understand this, it has to start with education. You have to be purpose-driven and you have to build with intention. I think that a new world is being built right before our eyes, and that's inevitable. And we're being gifted a massive blank canvas, a canvas that is not flat, but also a canvas that says handle with care. This is the fourth dimension. And in my eyes, a transformational discovery of our time. And it needs to be treated as such. It needs to be treated with respect. You need to be educated. Needless to say, you need to have fun with it as well. You need to try, experiment, fail, but also you have to be very thoughtful. So as a leader within a brand, the way that we're working is with that set of guiding principles: intention, quality, beauty, experimentation, emotion, connection. And we're not rushing into things. We could have easily said, okay, we're launching a collection of NFTs that will unlock some sort of loyalty program for you and some sort of physical activations. We haven't done that. We don't see true value in that yet. Right now, we're sort of studying, connecting with the community that's creating exciting things in this space and learning together as an organization. Yes, the metaverse and Web3 has fascinating applications to the customer, to the consumer, amazing consumer-facing applications with tremendous potential. But there's also a lot that it can do inside organizations. and apply to so many working functions. You look at legal, you look at intellectual property, you look at finance, operations, customer service, product design, right? And how you're leveraging 3D tools to build digitally first and then physical, right? So we're spending a lot of time learning together as a group, almost like a think tank, just because this is not a task for one person to undertake. We see that the more minds that are in it from all different areas of the business, even architecture, store design, visual merchandising, that are bringing ideas to the table, being deep in their world and contextualizing what all of this can do to their day to day, has been a really great way to get started. So we have no rush to launch something. Yes, I'm working on a series of different things. I would say at an exploratory phase right now. And that will lead to something when we're ready to introduce it to the world. We will, but we want it to be accessible. We want it to be human centric. We want it to be about the experience. We see the metaverse as a space for gathering, whether that's educational, whether that's emotional, spiritual, psychological, all of the good things that design can do in the physical domain in its analog form. We want to bring that back to the digital domain. So we're being very intentional and being very careful about what we launch, and that it needs to be interoperable, it needs to have utility, it needs to be inspiring, and it needs to be easily digestible.
I like that. You could call me curious or you could say nosy. But when it comes to mass market adoption, the things that major corporations are already doing, I'm curious to get your thoughts on programs like the Starbucks Odyssey launches and some of those other major brand activations, what you like from some of them and thoughts.
I like what's happening with loyalty. I do think that's a relevant right now application that can use NFTs, blockchain technology to share data in a more transparent way. So I like what that means, especially for mega brands such as Starbucks. I do think that they're approaching it in an interesting way, putting the customer at the center of it. I don't like a lot of the hype applications that I'm seeing that are so centered around NFTs. I do think that naturally there are industries that are more ripe for early adoption. If you look at the art world, if you look at luxury fashion, right? Take Louis Vuitton and Kusama, that amazing collaboration that they just dropped. They created this 3D virtual world where you can experience Yayoi Kusama's art in a new, unique way that anyone can access. You don't need to have the
Mhm.
acquisition power to buy a Louis Vuitton bag. You don't need to be in London to experience her beautiful infinity rooms. You can be anywhere with a portable device and be able to experience her work and her art. So those are just some of the examples that I'm seeing that I really, really like because they make access possible for people. And the more that people can interact with it in a way that is democratized, I think the better it is for this space and the better it is for mass adoption. I don't like when I see too many things centered around exclusivity and collectability, just because I don't think, know the true value of this. When it doesn't have utility, the value of a digital asset is incredibly volatile. And the last thing I would want to do is to hurt someone by bringing them into something that is overvalued. So
Mhm.
that's why we're being extra careful as to how we apply our thinking in the metaverse in 3D.
I'm guessing one of your acquisitions wasn't one of the Trump NFTs then?
Absolutely not. I really don't like those drops. I really am I'm not passionate about them. I'm not interested in them. I think it's just a really easy way in to the space that's not thoughtful. And I think in the end and over time, it's going to end up hurting it more.
I really admire the way in which it sounds as though you've led the organization to approach this space. If we can take a half step back, you mentioned earlier you've taken action throughout your career to advocate for technologies, ideas, principles that you believe in. How is the organization's mindset different today from when you took that first action, took that first step to advocate for the opportunities with Web3? Because I would imagine that when you're starting from a baseline, from an education and awareness perspective, the business's approach might be a lot different than where you're sitting now, sometime later after you've had the opportunity to educate staff and colleagues about the way in which you're viewing the space.
Yeah, great question. Well, as you know, I have a dual role. I lead the organization when it comes to product design and development and all the products that we create. And the Web3 and metaverse responsibility came up from some really rich conversations that I was having with our CEO, Janet Hayes, who is a really courageous CEO and likes to take risks and to learn. And she's so curious. I think that's one of her amazing defining traits. And we were just sharing, oh, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I've been doing. I've been experimenting with it. I think that as an organization, we need to take that first step so that when the time comes, we're ready. We don't want to be behind. And out of those no boundaries, open conversations, she had the idea to appoint me in this role. My head really wasn't headed that way. I really was just sharing. So it was nice to see that she saw that potential and believed in it. But when it comes to my metaverse responsibilities, I'm somewhat in an island, I would say. In the early days of any technology, when we're in this sort of frontier and when you're living on the edge of something that is not necessarily tangible yet, there are believers, there are adopters, but there are also detractors, right? I wouldn't be surprised that within our vast organizations, there are individuals that don't believe in it yet. It's my job to get them to believe and to educate that group in the most responsible way possible. So that's how I got in that role, and that's kind of what has shaped my thinking. I have room right now to guide and lead and absorb. I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time on the pulse of what's happening. I spend a lot of time doing a lot of outreach and speaking to startup leaders, founders, tech CEOs, futurists, media thinkers, thought leaders, just learning and sharing, which is really, really great about it. There's this beautiful community being built around this emerging technology that feels really inclusive and open. And the people at the helm are really purposefully and intentionally sharing and being open because they want this to succeed. They want this to be adopted. So that's how I got in the role. I guess passion led me there, and the opportunity that our CEO saw, and that's why I'm here.
So I'd like to ask you a hypothetical, because I would imagine folks who are graduating into similar roles at other organizations, large and small, might be faced with this predicament, which is, if when you were speaking with your CEO, Janet Hayes, and she had given you a mandate or a timeline to roll something out at the end of 2022 or by this date, how might you have changed your approach? Or would you have, I'm sure you probably would have advised her to take it slow and take it thoughtfully, but some folks might not have that opportunity. So I'm wondering if faced with that sort of dilemma, what your approach might have been like.
That's a really interesting question. I'm very, very lucky that Janet understands that we need to pace this right in order to invest in a way that is smart and also to be able to create value within our organization. So I'm very lucky in that way. I don't know. I feel like I would have had to challenge and advise against that thinking. The thing about Crate and Barrel is that we're privately held, and that does change our approach and our methodology and the way that we operate because we are more long-term minded. But I know that that is different for companies that are public or that are backed by private equity that need to run and rush into it. I guess it depends. If I were in the luxury space right now, I would be running towards this because I do see that that customer is really connected to what's happening in this space. They're very digitally savvy, they're tech driven. So I guess it depends on the situation that I would be in. If I'm at a specialty retailer, I would advise you to just, again, think with intention. And even if you have to rush to build, before you just start and dive in into creating, into building, set those guiding principles for yourself and stick by them. Set the filters that you want to go by, your philosophy. Start there and just put utility and interoperability front and center of this and think about the back end as much as the front end, if that makes sense.
I love that. I want to go in a little bit of a different direction. You just spoke about all of the different experiences you've been having, particularly since you took on the role. It's a space that also evolves quickly. What would you say is most shockingly or notably different about where your point of view might have been at when you took the role versus now that we sit here today?
Well, I go back to history all the time. I think that history has so many good answers. And if you look at the evolution of the internet, Web 1.0, which was the early version of the internet, all about read only, it was built by idealists. It was all about democratic access to information at any time. It transformed our society today. It really has. Then you move into Web 2.0 and you really start to see that shift into capitalism. It was built by capitalists. It was the read, write, and share era, the form of the internet that we all know today, which is centered around centralized applications. If we look at Web 3.0, who is it going to build by? Do we want it to be built by capitalists or idealists? I'm more on the side of the idealist. So I would say that my thinking has shifted in that way, that if we want to build something that is centered around community and activity, we have to be idealists. So I would say that that's a lot about how my thinking has shaped. Yes, the monetization part of it is integral to any business, and that should be, of course, an important factor of it all. But the way that you monetize, it's what needs to change and what could change, whether it's decentralization, open access, everything that some great organizations are working towards, like Lamina One, who I mentioned earlier. That's what needs to change. And I would say that that's the biggest change in my thinking that I was able to find in history through understanding sort of the growth of technology and that arc of adoption.
Sebastian, your two roles at Crate and Barrel, I'm sure there are moments of convergence right now between product design and between your responsibilities on the side of Web3 and the metaverse. Talk to us a little bit about where you're envisioning those two responsibilities continuing to dovetail, and maybe what you're excited about or curious about or wondering about as it relates to how product design might be affected by whatever your initiatives are, Crate and Barrel's initiatives are, or the industry's initiatives are as it relates to leveraging the technologies that are provided by Web3.
I would say I'm spending quite a bit of time across our organization understanding how we build in 3D and how that 3D asset pipeline can inform every step of the process. So travel with me for a minute. Today, we use a lot of 3D software to build design, whether that's SolidWorks, AutoCAD. There's a lot of really good 3D software that allows you to create things that we weren't able to create many years ago when everything was done by hand. Then you take that and you migrate it to the physical. Take the physical and then you photograph your campaigns, you photograph it for your website, you create your advertising campaign. Then you take the physical again and you use it to merchandise a prototype store. So I'm very curious with our team as to how that 3D asset pipeline can progress in every step of our process to over time be able to create advertising campaigns that are purely rendered in 3D, create virtual store prototypes that are purely rendered in 3D and completely merchandised in a way that all of our associates across all of our stores can access instead of building that just physically. How can a 3D model built the right way from its conception also be applied to augmented reality and feed design services as great tools for visualization for customers, or also for customers to see it in room? We have this great AR filter that was inputted into our system from our tech leaders and digital leaders that we see a lot of great engagement with. So understanding as a business, as an enterprise, how we're building in 3D, how that can impact and drive efficiencies, but also quality in our process is really interesting to me. And right now we're diving deep into AI and using that as a tool to sort of generate concepts. I'm speaking about generative AI, how we can understand prompting to create and build ideas that can influence our work. We're not just taking what the outputs are, but taking parts of it, using it as a tool to visualize what potential brand collaborations could look like before having to go in and design. So we're seeing a lot of speed and agility within that process, but also inspiration and innovation coming from it. I also think that exploring the idea of building purely for 3D can unlock a lot of interesting projects in physical form because there's no boundaries and you have a lot more freedom to create. So I would say that right now, a lot of the relevance that we're applying to our work is in design, is in product development, it's in product design, and will slowly evolve into more of that. But I'm also interested about the experiential side of things, like how can we build dreamscapes that become gathering spaces that are rooted in brilliant architecture and brilliant design to host, say, meditation sessions or cooking classes, or host a design consultation purely in the metaverse where we can pull in different objects and have you be surrounded by them and really visualize your space, bringing in your inspiration, bringing in some of the products that are your own. So that's a little bit about what we're exploring right now internally, I would say.
Quick interruption to this episode because I want to tell you all about another podcast that I think you'll enjoy. It's called Looking Forward, and it's from our good friend Ryan Anderson, who is the VP of Global Research and Insights at Miller Knoll. The show is all about the future of the workplace, particularly in the A&D industry, which you know is a topic we love here at Barriers to Entry. You got to check out Looking Forward if you're like us and want to push the conversation around what exactly works at work. The show is part of the Surround Podcast Network, just like Barriers to Entry. So go take a listen at surroundpodcasts.com or follow Looking Forward wherever you get your podcasts.
I think the dreamscapes is so interesting too, because there's so much research on psychology of color. It would be so interesting to see what psychology of dreamscape metaverse, how that sort of takes into effect as you're exploring the way that you interact with objects and your decision-making process, through to purchase. So I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, you should take a look at the work of Krista Kim. She's the founder of the tech art movement. techism art movement. And she's someone that's doing incredible things in this space because she's respecting it. And she is so focused around mental health, the power of technology and art that it has on the being. So I'm really inspired by what she's doing and how it can be applied to brands and to art projects alike.
See, that test, you didn't even have to be nosy and you got some of your answers.
Power of a good conversation.
So I think we're also curious, and you've referenced it a couple of times, but there is, I don't want to call it a downside, but there's a bit of negative connotation. You earlier talked about how Web3 and crypto and blockchain and metaverse are all related together, but not the same thing. But there certainly is every opportunity for there to be critics when brands come out and start exploring these things. And you've become potentially the face of that kind of criticism as it relates to Crate and Barrel. Have you had a lot of experiences where that's come across your desk or touched you in different ways? How's that something that you've potentially dealt with?
I haven't dealt with much of that yet, which has been great. I don't know if in a way I'm shielded from it or I'm just intentionally blocking it out, but I'm so centered on the work and super passionate and driven by it. And I am a believer. I really am a believer in this and I stand by it. So I'm grounded in that purpose and in that confidence. I'm not really focused on the critics. And if I have encountered it, I've immediately blocked it out and moved on from it.
That's amazing. I think that there's a certain nervousness when people see some of that criticism floating around that I don't know if I want to put a whole foot into this pool because something might come back at me. So it's great to hear that you've firmly established yourself in the space, but yet continue to feel that your purpose and your goals are moving you forward in such a way that it's not interrupting you at all.
Well, don't get me wrong, I have been nervous, but I think that has influenced and shaped my philosophy of building with intention. And I think that nervousness comes from great care of doing something that's meaningful, that's going to impact and change lives and not create anguish or anxiety or turn them into a detractor of the space by trying things that are just rooted again in that capitalist approach. Yeah, I have been nervous, but I think that's shaped my philosophy and it drowns the critics out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I heard that before. You're so methodical and so thoughtful about how you approach it. And there's a lot of respect behind the way that you are communicating even your approach to us. So I could see how that would shape it. You did mention before that you said we're early. And I know you've talked a lot about waves of adoption and curious to get your take or your approach on waves of adoption, where you think we're at, how long you think we'll be where we are right now.
I would say that I do think that the rise of extended reality is critical to mass adoption. Everything that we're seeing between AR, mixed reality, virtual reality headsets. I did read actually that Apple decided to hold on indefinitely for the launch of their AR headset, which I wonder if it's actually because of intention. Maybe they don't feel it's ready or as good as it can be, which I really, really respect. I would like to believe, as someone watching from the sidelines, that that is the case. I would say that the number of users is growing. You've seen that evolution from radio to TV to desktop to mobile, right? And I do see that 2021 was the year where we're starting to see that shift, particularly in younger generations, out of mobile and into XR. So that's really, really exciting. I do think that we have an incredible decade in front of us of growth and innovation. The more that tech is being built and the more that it's built right and it's being successful, the more that people are going to come into this space. But I also think that whenever new technology is introduced, there's always that hype and value curve that starts with a technology trigger. Then there's that peak of inflated expectations where everyone's like, oh my God, what is this? How is this going to change the world? Everybody's talking about it. Not a lot of people understand it because it's really hard because it's not tangible, it's not real yet. So we saw a lot of that through 2020, mostly 2021, I would say, because 2020 our minds were navigating that pandemic. And then after that peak of inflated expectations, it tips down and you're in this, what they call the throw of disillusionment, where people are just like, nothing came of it. Everybody was talking about it, but it's all just hearsay. It's just a lot of hype, things that I don't see the use for, things aren't going to work. And there's a really good video that you should watch. I'm sure you've probably seen it, where Bill Gates is talking to David Letterman about the internet and what it means. And he's like, the internet, why do I need this? Why, if I have a radio, if I could just watch it on TV, if I could just record it or VCR it? And Bill Gates is like, you can watch it anytime, you can carry it with you. I think it was in 2001. Amazing interview. So that's kind of where we are right now, I would say, that throw of disillusionment. But then the real people, the people that are invested in it, the people that are not talking about it, but creating it, start to carry us through what they call the slope of enlightenment, where things are starting to become real. Like if you talk to me about AI 10 years ago, I would be like, what are you talking about? Then comes in ChatGPT from OpenAI, which has been being built for the past 10, 15 years, and people are starting to be fascinated by it. So the more that technology comes to life, and I do believe that technology is at a place where we can unlock this 3D visualization in a way that it is spatial, we're going to start to get enlightenment. And then comes the plateau of productivity where things are real, things start getting adopted, they start to generate and create value. You also have to think that, and this is great thinking that I learned from Alvin Wang, who is the head of tech at HTC, brilliant, brilliant tech human. He kind of walked me through the 20th century. It starts with industrial, then it moved into computing, and we're headed into spatial. Those major shifts in technology take time. So I do think that that we have a very exciting decade upon of us and ahead of us, and it would be 10 to 15 years until we start to see computing move into the spatial world where we're accessing 3D environments through super light glasses, where we have super accurate 3D mapped renders of the world around us, and where you're starting to see entertainment, technology, commerce, experiences all around you outside of a mobile device.
When you put it that way, it requires a lot of patience because I think about things, and I think a lot of my colleagues think about things in 5-year increments. And when we're thinking about we're 10 to 15 years away from that mass adoption, I think it requires the pragmatic thinking that you bring to the table, Sebastian, to have that stick-to-itiveness attitude and to be thoughtful about the approach we take, what's the caution we're heeding, and how are we being deliberate to make sure that when we're deciding what direction a business like Crate and Barrel is going to go, taking your time and being okay with the fact that we're still navigating our way through the slope of disillusionment, as you said.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. This is just my crystal ball. Luckily, it's a crystal ball that I share with many other folks in the community, which is really nice to have that support and reassurance. But it's a crystal ball right now. It could be longer, it could be shorter. But as I mentioned earlier, believe that history holds all the answers. And if you look at history and if you look at the progress of technology, industry, commerce, it's all in there. And that's how these disruptions, these major shifts, these new paradigms kind of take life.
I think the other thing is that we're also in a media environment where everyone wants everything to be quite instantaneous. And 2022 is supposed to be the year of the metaverse. What happened? We didn't know what the metaverse was in 2020 kind of thing. So to your point about the long view, it's not entirely congruent in some cases. And to take the pessimistic side to the Apple delay, it might just be that they're a publicly traded company and they're nervous about their stock price in this media environment that we're in right now, especially with all the tech layoffs. So what it really sets up is a great opportunity. You mentioned before, you're a private company. You can play the long game. You can have a longer view if you have the right leader, which you've already alluded to the fact that you do. But it's also an amazing opportunity for startups and for innovation to really thrive outside of the tech behemoths that have dominated the news and dominated the stock market for the last decade. So from that standpoint, there is a really interesting optimism about the building that can happen and the new players that have the opportunity to emerge.
Absolutely. And I do think that the macroeconomic pressure that we're facing right now and that we'll face through 2022 is going to maybe pull out the people out of the space that are not in it to win it or that are not serious about it, because it does require an investment, it does require risks, and it could be a distraction to them, to their core businesses. But I do think that there are pros and cons about that. You're right about the Apple headset. It could be that it's just not the right time in the economy to drop something so big. Whatever reason is behind it, whether it's they're not ready in terms of quality or design, or they're holding it off for a time where people are ready to adopt it, I really respect that decision, because I do believe that everything in due time is going to really build this space for the long term, as you mentioned. And again, that's the privilege of working at Crate. I don't have the pressure, and our CEO has not given us the pressure to launch something with a deadline.
Our community of listeners, they're predominantly designers, manufacturers in the A&D industry. This is a bit of a tangent question. Wearing your product designer hat, where do you see the trends for 2023? And then where do you see in that 5-year, 10-year where this technology starts to influence design trends? Put you on the spot for trends.
Yeah. Good question. I am not a believer of trends.
Mhm.
I used to be a believer in trends. I have a background between fashion and home, so I've been able to see the differences between both industries. I get it in fashion, where trend cycles equals sales and revenue. However, I am starting to see consumers' mindsets kind of shift. And I think that home is a space where you can have the luxury of not being trendy. So I believe in building things with a timeless approach, which I really go by. So I'm really not a great person when it comes to speaking about trends. To me, like you said, data
Mhm.
is the trend.
Hmm.
Meaning that, and it shouldn't even be a trend, it should be a core principle. Being data driven and gathering insights, not only on the micro level, but at the macro level, should really be what informs good design. We are surrounded by stuff. We're surrounded by so much. There's like a brand for every tribe. Is that responsible? Is that building with intention? I'm not sure. So, to answer your question, and I'm not sure you're getting what we were hoping to hear. To me, data should be the leading trend that we're adopting as an industry, versus being driven so much by look or color or print and pattern. That to me is very one-dimensional, especially in the stage that we're in. And if you really are asking yourselves the big questions, you should not really be super led by that, if that makes sense.
We appreciate that. We always appreciate honesty and your real opinions and approach.
Sebastian, is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners about initiatives from Sebastian or initiatives about Crate and Barrel that they should go and check out?
If anything, I hope that this conversation inspires anyone that's curious about it to sort of approach it with a lot of intention and mindfulness. Think about not just design, but also how it can apply to every single part of your business and how we're shifting culturally into a new realm. If you look at commerce, right now we talk a lot about direct to consumer. Eventually, it's going to be direct to avatar. What does that mean? Advertising. Today, you look at advertising within your business, it's all about targeting and it's all about two dimensionality. Is the future of advertising all about choice and three dimensionality? Think about privacy and the privacy protocols that you have within your business. It's going to move from trust to truth because right now we put a lot of trust around the tech platforms and applications and tech businesses that we do business with. And we're eventually going to move into a space of far more transparency. So think about that. Think about marketing and how that's going to change. Right now, we've been in this space of storytelling, telling a story, share your story, which is great. But think about how the metaverse, how Web3 can make that shift into story living, being able to really live through an experience and share and educate and inspire consumers around your brand through actually living great experiences. If you think about retail, if you're a retail brand or a retail business, which is the area that I'm in, we speak a lot about channels and being multi-channel. You have your brick and mortar, your stores, you have your e-commerce website. The metaverse allows you to be multidimensional. And how does a metaverse experience or platform or space allows you to bring in customers through different dimensions at different times from different affinities and different communities is really interesting. And think about service. Think about the service that you're offering to your clients, your customers. Service can be very static today. How can it migrate to being something that's far more real time? If you log into a website, it has to load. If you have to make a phone call, it has to ring. Service needs to start to change to being real time and happen at the moment where you want it, when you want it. How can artificial intelligence aid to that? How can 3D visualization tools, mixed reality, extended reality, augmented reality be a driver of that? So if I were to plug anything, it's just to hopefully inspire the listener. I also hope that I can inspire you to experiment and imagine. We are entering a virtual domain that can unlock a great amount of innovation in our physical world, like I mentioned earlier. And if designers can create in a world that has no boundaries, creativity is limitless. And I hope that it unleashes true originality. I do think that the design space today is a little bit homogenized. And what I'm seeing being created in metaverse platforms in 3D is so purely original in so many different ways that I think we're in this new frontier of true originality, which I'm super excited about. And I'm excited to see what figures emerge from it. When you open and unlock a new medium, new art movements will emerge, new artists will create, new ideas will take shape. So I'm excited about what that canvas is going to do and to be a part of it. And I don't even know what we're going to create yet, which is in a way scary, but also super exciting. We don't have all the answers, but I know that so many things are possible. And I know that the tools required to get us there are getting better by the minute and every day. So that's incredibly optimistic.
I think that your non-plug might have been our best plug yet. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sebastian, you've done such an amazing job educating, and I was lulled into a false sense of security. And now the challenge you just issued That's me thinking, all right, now it's time to get creative and it's time to let the rubber meet the road. So really appreciate that thoughtfulness.
Thank you for a great conversation. Amazing questions. You're a great team and super curious about it. And it's been a pleasure speaking to you guys today.
Well, we do have one more question that we ask
Mm-hmm.
every single guest.
Shoot.
So you gave us really fantastic advice, and a lot of our listeners, there's quite a few that are just entering this space for the first time or are just getting curious now. And in addition to all of that fantastic advice that you just gave, do you have any specific resources that you would suggest that they check out?
Take a look at Discord as an application, as a means to enter this space. There's so many amazing servers on Discord. Lamina One has an amazing server where they're sharing a lot of news, emerging applications, updates to their platform, really great things. So I found Discord to be an amazing tool to learn and to be engaged and to build community. That would be my number one, I would say, Discord. Start experimenting with AI. I mean, AI is so exciting right now. Play with ChatGPT, play with Midjourney and DALI. Really, really fun tools for you to experiment and start to understand how this works. Matthew Ball's Metaverse book is terrific, and it's for anyone that wants to learn and enter this space. It's a really, really great tool to learn the basics. LinkedIn is a great tool if you know who to follow and if you follow the right people. I think you can learn a lot from it. I like personally what Alvin Wang posts a lot, very educational and very relevant. I like what Kasey Hackle shares. She's often referred to as the godmother of the metaverse, but she has an amazing podcast for Adweek that is terrific. Catherine Martin from Media Monks shares a lot of great insight on her LinkedIn page as well. Leslie Shannon from Nokia. She actually is releasing a book that will be launching this summer and I believe is ready for pre-order. Interconnected Realities, How the Metaverse Will Transform Our Relationship with Technology Forever. Really good book dropping this summer. She's the head of trend and innovation scouting at Nokia and just a brilliant thinker.
Love that.
So yeah, find those LinkedIn creators, true creators that are sharing a lot of great stuff in this space.
We've seen that too. And it's almost like a sense of, wait, Andrew, you've got to say this one. I'm trying to say that high tides rise all boats.
You actually nailed it. You
I did,
actually nailed
okay.
it. Yeah.
Can never get one of those right. We see a true sense of that in the community, and those are some great resources.
One more I would say is any podcast from Kara Swisher, who's covering tech in Silicon Valley. I just love her style, her approach, her thinking, her speed, her charisma, her sharp mind. So I'm another great tool.
Love those resources. Sebastian, thank you so much for your time and for all the insight today. We're definitely going to be watching to see what's coming out thoughtfully from Crate and Barrel and what it is that you choose ultimately from all of those many areas that you're exploring to really deliver into your overall customer experience. We can't wait to see what's next, and we can't thank you enough for being on the podcast today.
Thank you guys for a great conversation. Excited to hear it when this drops.
Amazing.
Thanks, Sebastian.
That was definitely a great conversation. There isn't much that Sebastian doesn't seem to have his finger on the pulse of when it comes to design, our industry, technology. That was impressive.
Yeah, I felt at the same time much smarter and less smarter after that interview. Much smarter because of the knowledge
He threaded that needle, yeah.
by Sebastian, and less smarter just and intimidated by everything Sebastian shared. I mean, the insights he has to share, he's a motivator, and he's also somebody who I think I felt inspired to pick up a book and read a little bit more. I know it's late for New Year's resolutions. Tessa has made that clear, but I feel like I need to do a little bit more reading because Sebastian had a lot of great resources to share with us coming off of this episode.
Yeah, the production team will be busy getting those show notes together after that wrap, for sure. Tess, what do you love?
You know, I was going to say I love the resources he shared, but I mean, you just already took it from you guys, and I love.
The heart wants what it wants, Tess. The heart wants what it wants.
I love when we're all on the same page. That's what I love. Yeah.
I think it's going to be really exciting to see what their organization starts to come up with as some of their early work coming out in the space and how they're going to try and create community and connect with their customers. Clearly, he's not leaving too many stones unturned in terms of where to gather inspiration from. So it's going to be exciting to see where they actually end up putting their thought and effort.
I have to say, Andrew, I love everything you just said. And I would encourage you, because I know we all have plans this evening, right? We have to go out to dinner with a loved one or maybe order in and spend some time by ourselves.
Or ignore the occasion. Don't forget those.
Ignore the occasion or celebrate the occasion. Either way, but in the spirit of allowing folks to celebrate or uncelebrate Valentine's Day, Andrew, why don't you take us home?
I would like to express our unconditional love to our production team of Sam and Wize and Hannah and Kasey and the entire studio by SANDOW. We love that Barriers to Entry is a part of the Surround Podcast Network. And if you go to surroundpodcast.com, and that's Surround Podcast with an S, and smash that follow button, we hope that Cupid's arrow will strike you and you will fall in love with this show, and you will join us next time when we're over this Valentine's Day gimmick, but continue to break down the barriers to entry.
That was lovely.
I hate Valentine's Day.
Discover more with Surround, a podcast network from SANDOW Design Group, featuring the architecture and design industry's go-to shows. Surround is the hub for creative conversations, endless inspiration, and design resources. Hear from tastemakers, researchers, designers, and architects themselves. Trending now on Surround is The Mic from NYC by Design, hosted by Debbie Melman. Learn more at surroundpodcasts.com.